Usually on the channel, all I talk about is engines with problems. So the fact is there are some engines that really almost never have any problems. So tonight I wanted to talk about the Good ISX. It's an ISX 15 in a truck, and it's got about a little less than 6,000 hours on it, and it's been zero maintenance other than standard oil changes, adjust the brakes, things like that. Of course, I'm reflecting just on the engine. That's all I deal with, but the rest of the truck hasn't been much problem either. So let's take a look at the Good ISX. You can see at the top, this is an ISX 15 CM2350. And I've actually got two different screens kind of merged together here. So the purple screen, or the purple bar that you see at the top, that's the header or the top section of a section in the ECM you can look at that's called engine protection. And what engine protection is if the ECM has to log a fault or take an action to protect the engine from damage, then that fault will of course show up in the fault table. It will also drive a light on a dash, and that fault will be registered here in engine protection. Now you see where it says no data is available on the top left. That means that in the 5,500 hours this engine ran, and the next screen we'll see exactly how many it was, that it never had a fault that drove engine protection. So what faults drive into engine protection? Engine RPM overspeed, and that can be because a driver ran down a hill in gear and oversped it. It can be because something happened in the engine and it ran away. It can be because the truck was in a place where, let's say, there was natural gas leaking in the air and the engine ran away on the fumes. So there's a few reasons you can have that happen. The other things that'll drive engine protection are lower no oil pressure, high coolant temperature, and high intake air temperature. Intake air temperature is important because you can melt the tops of pistons if the air gets too hot going into the cylinder. Now down on the bottom half of this screen where you see the little tables that the top left is engine oil pressure and then the middle is engine speed and so on. These are called engine abuse tables. And they call it abuse because you can see on the right side it shows a timestamp. So if you look, all these tables are zeros except for one, the engine oil temperature on the bottom left, and that was between severity-wise they show 235, 245. The next one down is 245 to 257, and then the next one down is greater than 257, and then the bottom one is just greater than 235. So the only reason I'm talking about that table is because there's actually timestamps on the right. Now, this truck's a heavy hauler. I mean heavy. It's always permitted loads. It's always well over 100,000. So to see oil temperatures that are between 235 and 245 do not excite me at all. It doesn't help that this engine is down south where you've got hot ambient air temperatures anyway. So let's go back to the oil temperatures, the 245 to 257. Well, that's getting up there. That would probably log a light for the driver to probably drop a gear or back out of the throttle. I think 247 is where the light would come on and tell them to back out of gear. It never got over 257. Again, I think it only can read to 265 or 267. And then on the bottom, it just tells us that it was over 235 for 583 hours. And that's no big deal. It's just part of running a truck if you haul heavy. So everything on here looks just wonderful. You can't ask for a better protection or abuse screen. Let's take a look at the next slide. Here we are at our regen history screen, and look at the third column over from the left, and it says time since previous regeneration, and it's every 102 to 103 hours, and the average is 102 hours and the standard deviation is 43 minutes. If you can get standard deviation under 2 hours, that engine's and after treatment is in good shape. This one is under 1 hour. So this one, it's probably the best one that I've ever seen. And it is dead on steady. So the engine's running clean. The fuel system's working great. If you look over at the far right, the maximum diesel particulate differential pressure, it never gets over 2.6. So that engine runs working 102 hours, and it basically fills with soot from it's probably about 0.8 when it's done regenning. The numbers you see on the far right are the maximum or the trigger number that it was at when it started the regen. And then the temperatures are all normal on here. So if I owned an engine, I would hope that it ran like this. So I wanted to show you this because you guys just got done going to school and looking at some stuff that just beat us up. So this was a breath of fresh air for me when I saw it. And again, you can see at the top, the engine had 5,500 hours on it. And it gets serviced every 10 to 15,000 miles in terms of engine oil changes and fuel filters. And it's just been a really good truck for the company. So I also wanted to give you some good numbers so you could see when you do comparisons. And remember, this is as good as it's going to get. So I wouldn't expect your stuff to be equal to this, but if it gets even close to it in standard deviation or your particulate filter pressure and your other screens we looked at, the engine protection and abuse, you're in great shape. Thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe. See you next time.